Welcome. This class is We Are Not Alone at Tisha B'Av and the Halakhot of Communal Obligation. This is part of Drisha's Tisha B'Av courses in collaboration with Yeshivat Macharat and Yeshivat Chovevei Torah. This afternoon we have Rabbi Haggai Resnikoff of Yeshivat Chovevei Torah with us, who will be teaching this class. Rabbi Resnikoff is also the dean at Yeshivat Chovevei Torah. This class is going to discuss the destruction of Jerusalem, how it was not a result of a failure in leadership alone. It was also the result of individuals who failed to fulfill their communal responsibilities. We'll spend a short time surveying the biblical and rabbinical texts that express this before doing a deeper dive into what the legal obligations of individual to the community are and far community extends in this modern age. And with that, I'll turn this to you, Rabbi Resnikoff.
Hi, everybody. I see some faces that I know and some names that I know. I see some people who are still not known to me, but welcome. This is an interesting situation. I mean, situation is not the word I mean to say. What I mean to say is that I've been working on this question of individual obligations to the community for the last year or so. And everything to me seems to dovetail with that comment, with that topic. So I was listening to Avi give the presentation. I was like, wait, is that what I'm teaching about? Who said that? And I was like, oh, I wrote that. That's what I wrote before I got all my materials together. You'll find that it's not exactly my point about Jerusalem is not precisely the point that I made when I wrote the comment, but I hope it's enough that it's not a total bait and switch. I hope that people have received the source sheet. It was sent out, I don't know, yesterday, I think. If you just came on, then that's fine. I'm going to share my screen so we have the opportunity to look at that together. So here's what we're going to do. I am going to read in Hebrew these mekorot and talk a little bit about the background to them, and then we'll have some opportunities to discuss. Let's start with our orientation sugya, the source that really connects us to Tisha B'Av. So this is a source in Masechet Gittin. It's an unusual location. Masechet Gittin is mostly about divorce law, but around the 55, 56 page mark, you have this set of stories about Churban Yerushalayim, about the destruction of the temple, the destruction of Jerusalem. So those of you who are in the know may recognize the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. There's a phrase in the Talmud that comes from Masechet Gittin that the reason for the destruction of the temple was this feud that it's funny because it's not on Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Kamsa doesn't even appear in the story. It's really a feud that Bar Kamsa has with another person. The point is that the message of that story is that people are not taking care of one another. So, I mean, I could try to push that story to try to figure out how does that connect with a question of communal responsibility. But the next story that is offered, once it's sort of explained how the powder keg was touched, the next story really is about the way people understand their position in a city, in a community. And so that's where I'm going to start. Shadrei. So the last thing that happens before we get into this Talmudic piece is that the former general who had come against Jerusalem actually decides that he doesn't want to destroy Jerusalem and leaves. And so now the next piece is with regard to the Roman authorities. Shadrei lavayu Laspasianus Caesar. Ata tsara latlatshane. The Roman authorities sent to Jerusalem Vespasian, who was called Caesar. I'm never sure exactly what I should ask a classicist sometime, or maybe one of you knows, what the Caesar surname sort of means. It seems to me that Julius was called Caesar before he became Caesar, but Caesar is the word that we use for things like czar, and right. It's an emperor word. So I'm not sure if it's because it was somebody's name. In any case, the Talmud refers to this person as Vespasian, the Vespasian Caesar, who indeed becomes the Roman emperor shortly after his coming to Jerusalem, at least in rabbinic lore, and but they're calling him Caesar already. So he came and he laid siege to Jerusalem for 3 years. There were 3 rich men in Jerusalem: Nakdimon ben Gurion, Uven Kalba Savua, Uben Tzitzit. So there were 3 rich men. They had these interesting names: Nakdimon ben Gurion, Ben Kalba Savua, which means the son of a satisfied dog, and Ben Tzitzit, the son of Tzitzit. There's not a lot of the Gemara then goes into explaining their names. I'm not going to spend time in the conversation of their names, but I just want to note that there's fairly small number of people here who are actually going to step in and take responsibility for the city. Chad amar lehu. One of them said to the others, Ana zaina lehu bechite v'sa'are. One of them said, I will sustain this city with, or it's really to them, meaning the residents of the city, with wheat and barley. V'chan amar lehu b'dechamra b'demalcha umashcha. One of them said, I will provide wine and salt and oil. V'chan amar lehu b'detzive. And one of them said, I will provide firewood. V'shavchu Rabbanan l'detzive. So this is just an interesting moment. I don't know that this is so relevant, but there's Evan Masu Habonim Haitala Rosh Pina. There is a feeling that, like, well, 2 of them are giving food items to people, and one of them is giving wood. Like, is that so necessary? But as the Talmud goes on, following this, right, this little ellipsis that I've put on the page, what is behind this ellipsis? I can follow my cursor. What's behind this ellipsis is essentially that without firewood, it's not so easy to actually bake your bread, cook your meals, and all of those kinds of things. And so actually firewood may end up being the limiting factor in this matter. Damar Fista Akalba Achlava Dechite by Shitin Achlave Detzive. So Rav Chisda says, for a 1 warehouse of wheat, in order to make food out of that, you need 60 warehouses of wood, right? Wood is not compact, it's not dense. There was enough food in Jerusalem that there would not have been famine for 21 years. They had enough food to withstand a prolonged siege for 21 years. There were, the translation, Steinsaltz's translation says zealots. Birione in modern Hebrew means like bullies, like tough people who are gangsters, who rule the city. And this, by the way, in the Talmudic account, this is the first indication that there was an uprising against Rome, and that was the reason that the Romans came to destroy Jerusalem. This is the first hint. Until then, we thought it had to do with some insult that had been offered or interpreted as offered by the Jews to the Roman emperor. So there are these birione, these tough guys, these gangsters. They said to the Rabbanan, Nefuk v'nav. Oh, sorry. Amru lahu Rabbanan. The rabbis said to them, they were in charge of Jerusalem, and the rabbis said, Nepuk v'navid shalma behadaihu. The rabbinic tradition regarding Churban Habayit is that if the rabbis had had their way, they would have made peace with Rome and prevented the destruction. I mean, I guess that's like a reasonable memory. They don't remember themselves as fallen martyrs, as people who held to a principle. They remember themselves as having been the reasonable ones, the ones who wanted to make this to make peace. Lashavkinhu. They would not let the rabbis out of the gates. Amru lahu, nipok v'navid krava be'adaihu. No, let's go out and we'll fight them off. We'll send them packing. Amru lahu Rabbanan, the rabbis said to him, lo mistaya milta. They said, like, you'll never be successful. Now, it's not clear to me if the rabbis are actually able to prevent these biryonim from going out and doing this, and fighting. In any case, they don't seem to do it. Instead, they take an internal action. Kamu kalanhu lahanhu ambre dechite v'saare v'hava kufna. They got up, meaning these gangsters, and they burned down the warehouses of wheat and barley that could have sustained Jerusalem for 21 years. They burned it all down, and there was famine, and so there was no choice but to either try to break the siege or to just die of famine inside the walls. In the context of communal activities, communal behavior, so there are some stellar standouts. There are some villains here. What do you see? What stands out to you in terms of what would have been a way to do this differently that might have had more successful results? So I'm just going to point out a few suggestive moments for me. So first of all, and this is actually the way the Jewish community works today, the entire city was being sustained by 3 wealthy people, which already indicates to me that something is not going right in this city. If everybody is hand to mouth, I don't promise that everybody was hand to mouth, but if the city was going to be sustained by 3 people. So on one hand, you could say, well, if those 3 people hadn't accumulated their wealth, they wouldn't have been able to sustain the city. On the other hand, you have to wonder, why wasn't sustaining the city a communal proposition that everybody could give of what they had? Maybe the wealthy people could give more, the poor people could give less, but there would be a sense in which the community was united in this experience of being under siege. And the question I think that comes to me is sort of what perhaps the zealots, the gangsters, would not have felt quite so free to go about and burn down the warehouses if they knew that all of the support of the city had gone into it. And on the flip side of that, visionaries work against majorities all the time. People who are true believers, who think that God is on their side and that they are the ones who have the opportunity to do God's will, those people, you never know if that would change anything. So I don't know if the outcome would have been different. Something about this story rubs me the wrong way. I think I'm supposed to be grateful and admiring of these 3 rich people who stood up to really give all of their wealth, I presume, to Jerusalem to sustain the city for 21 years. And instead, I feel a little dissatisfied that instead of the wealth being distributed amongst the city and being taken from the whole group, it was instead focused in one place. Now, let's talk about the rabbis and the gangsters, because that's sort of the next step. There are these gangsters who are in charge. Apparently, I'm calling on my historical knowledge, the Talmud doesn't tell us anything, by force of violence. They are not in charge by virtue of having been elected or having had some kind of popular support. They're the ones with the weapons, and they have sort of seized the city. The rabbis also have a certain kind of power. I'm not sure if the rabbis' power is quite as populist as maybe they want us to believe. I would point out that, in the rabbinic circle, there is a decent amount of conversations with, commoners, people who are not from the rabbinic clique, but it doesn't feel like they belong, like they're in the same, that they belong to the same community. It feels like there's sort of this rabbinic group, and then there are the outsiders. The rabbis call them Amei Haaretz, the people of the land. And they were a little disdainful of them and a little bit like distrustful of them. I'm not sure. It is the historical perspective tells us that the rabbinic movement was an urban movement. This is the rabbinic imagination sort of going back into Yerushalayim. So in this story, maybe we can imagine that the rabbis have some popular support. In any case, the rabbis then sort of present themselves as being the peacemakers. The gangsters say like, no, we'll go out and fight. And the response is something along the lines of, you'll never be successful, at least as is. So was it in response to the rabbi's statement that the gangsters then went and burned the warehouses? Was that something in the plans all along? Who exactly is it who came up with this plan to put the city in distress to the point where they really had to attempt to break the siege? What happens in the Talmudic story? We're going to stop our Talmudic story here. But what happens in the Talmudic story is that, in fact, there is no attempt to break the siege. There's no sally forth where they're like, well, it's now or never. Let's get this done. They sit and they starve. That's what happens until the Romans break down the walls. So whatever the plan was, it did not succeed. I guess the message that I'm taking from this before we move to the next step is the perspective of two groups coming from sort of different perspectives who were not thinking of the community. One is this rich elite who were thinking about the survival of the community, but were not necessarily thinking about the unity of the community. And then these gangsters who were thinking to somehow demand or force the community's hand. And none of it went well. None of it was successful in the end. All right, let's have a look at the next piece. From here, what I'd like to do is step into the world of halakha and ask a simple question. What do people, individuals, commoners, and elites alike, what do people owe to their community? How is that handled? So the conversation here starts with a Mishnah and Masechet Baba Batra, which discusses when you live in community, what kind of capital investment, what kind of projects do you have to pay for? So the Mishnah goes as follows: Kofin oto livnot beit shar v'delet lechatzer. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer lo kol hachatzerot reuyot lebeit shar. We force a person, or they force a person, to build a guardhouse for a courtyard where people live. It's like in Talmudic circles, the anatomy or the architecture of the rabbinic period is well known, but I'll try to describe it. There is a often four-cornered courtyard which has living quarters centered around it, and the courtyard is accessible by alleys and gates. And the courtyard is common land. Everybody owns it together. When you buy your house, you actually buy into the courtyard as well. So the members of the courtyard who live in the other houses surrounding the courtyard, if they decide that they want to build a gatehouse and a gate outside their courtyard in order to prevent, well, actually, in order, I'll leave for a second, but they decide that they want this thing, they can force that. They can force that on members of the courtyard who say, I can't afford it, or the courtyard doesn't need it, or I disagree. There are certain things that you, as a member of the community, have to join with the community and for the good of the community. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel doesn't disagree with this per se. However, he steps out and he says, not every courtyard needs a gatehouse. Now, the question of why you would have a gatehouse is an interesting thing. The Gemara, when it goes into it, suggests that the reason that you would need a gatehouse is to keep people from like looky-looing into your courtyard, like from like peeping into your picnics and things like that. My expectations, just sort of like as a modern reader and as I first read it, is that it's about security, to keep people from wandering into the courtyards and possibly having access to the houses. A gated community, which we kind of think of often today in a sort of negative light, of sort of overt attempts at privacy. But the Gemara, or the Mishnah rather, sees that as a very reasonable thing to do, to have some security on hand in order to keep people out of the courtyard. That reading is strengthened when we see the parallel text that follows. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer, lo kol ha'ayarot re'uyot lechoma. We force him, meaning a member of a city, to build for the city a wall, and a double door, meaning a large gate, and a crossbar, something that you can put to bar the door. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel once again says, not all of the cities require a wall. So let's pause for a minute on this text and think. I'll just repeat what I hinted at previously, which is that the city one, there's no way to say that they're building a wall and a crossbar and a gate in order to prevent people from gazing in. It's not a problem of privacy, it's a problem of security. However, there is so that would suggest that the earlier piece about the chatzer is actually not is really about security as well. What I want to focus on is the machloket between Tanakama, the original position that says we can force in any courtyard and in any city, you can force everyone essentially to pay or to build security things. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel then says back, no, not everything requires this. What is the essence of this disagreement? What is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel trying to say that makes a difference in terms of his perspective? Eva.
Maybe he's suggesting that there needs to be a process for the people who live there to come to a meeting of the minds about what they need and what they don't.
Okay, so an interesting question here, and actually it becomes an interesting question in the halakha, is like, who's the person who forces this issue, and how exactly is it forced? It's interesting. Does anybody have a guess how you force? It says kofinoto. We force them. Does anybody have a guess how you could force somebody to do something in rabbinic time? So the rabbinic perspective, like when I read this, I've been writing about this Mishnah, and I just sort of wrote without even thinking, it's so obvious, or the obvious solution is that you do this using Beit Din. You sue somebody or some group of people that you say well, the city needs a wall. People are not building the wall. The courts should force the people to build the wall. It is striking that it's extremely difficult to find a case where Beit Din is actively appealed to in these stories, which might mean that it's just using social pressures and so on, things like that. Despite the fact that I just said that, the most common and reasonable position is that this is done by way of Beit Din. But then it still becomes a question is this something that the minority can force the majority to do? A minority of citizens feel enough threat from the outside that they can say, we need a wall or we need a gatehouse, and that they can then go to court and demand that the majority who don't see the need and don't want to make the payment do this. So fascinatingly, The halacha seems to be, well, it's a machloket, we could have guessed that, but there is at least one position it paskened for Ashkenazim. The halacha for Ashkenazim, based on the psak of the Ramah, is that yes, actually, the minority, on these matters of security, the minority can indeed force the majority. And then it becomes a question of like, on these matters only, or perhaps on other matters as well. So that's the beginning. What if we then expand and we say, and as other sources do, and we say, actually, this isn't just about security measures. And indeed, like as you go through sort of the list of rabbinic sources on this and move from the Talmudic era into later eras. So first of all, even in the Talmudic eras, there are sources that say that you can force people to buy a Sefer Torah for a city. You can force them to pay or to build a Beit Knesset. You can force people to fix the roads and dig the cisterns, things that are necessary for the community. Later on, we talk about things like, giving tzedakah, participating in the local tzedakah fund. You can force people to do that. Talk about hiring people, like hiring a rabbi for the town. You can force people to be a part of that. And that begs the question, which I think this is like a long way of getting back to Eva's point. It speaks to Eva's point, which is like, so who gets to decide what constitutes a communal need and what doesn't constitute a communal need? Is that going to be the court? Like when you go to court, are they going to say, well, we don't think this is actually a need and therefore we're not going to require it? Or is that something that can be discussed elsewhere? So it's not a source that I brought, but there is an important response of the Maharam, 14th century Germany, Maharam of Rottenburg, who essentially argues that, as you might expect, this is actually done by majority rules. It's done. It's not clear to me how official the vote is, but it seems to be done by a town meeting that Eva suggested and an actual vote, or at least sense of what the majority position is. The Maharam doesn't discuss what happens when you have a 51-49 split. He assumes that there's going to be a majority and a minority, and we hold according to the majority. But it does seem to be that the halacha is that the majority rules. But I don't know that Rabban Shimon Gamliel is going that far. In other words, it begs the question. Process is always a question in terms of law, right? How exactly do we enforce and how do we come to the decisions about this kind of thing? But I think that Rabban Shimon Gamliel is offering something much simpler than this. If we take for granted that even in cases where security, or rather not even in, but where security is concerned, even the minority can force the majority, which sounds to me like the gist of this Mishnah. It isn't said explicitly until later in the Middle Ages. Then there's a question of like, what? The suggestion of the Tanakama, of the original position, seems to be that every city requires a wall and every courtyard requires a gatehouse. And Rabban Gamliel comes along and says, hold your horses. You can't just force people to invest in something that is not necessary. You need to show need. You need to be able to show necessity. Not every city needs a wall, and not every courtyard needs a gatehouse. In the Gemara where this is discussed, they talk about the fact that cities on the borderland cities, which both have a problem with possible invading armies, and also a possibility of often those border areas are the areas where there's not as much enforcement of law. You have sort of a lawless element out there. Imagine the Wild West, right? That's where the outlaws flee to. So border towns need a wall, but not every town. Interior towns to a city, small backwater hamlets don't need a wall. Nobody is going to attack there. And the position of the rabbis is, you know what? Sometimes they do. Sometimes even those places need a wall. And so ultimately, when we get into the halachic literature, starting with the Rambam and ending in the Shulchan Aruch, not ending, but continuing through the Shulchan Aruch, we actually find that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is laid aside. Actually, the assumption is that security matters. When there is something that is legitimately a security matter, you actually can force anybody. The minority can force the majority on these matters. The reason I bring this source is to bring up the sort of essential tension that I think Eva also hinted at, which is the question of the autonomy of the individual versus the needs of the community. How much autonomy does an individual have to remove themselves and say, I'm not participating. I'm not participating. This is not something that I see as necessary or that will benefit me, and therefore I'm not going to participate. And that tension really follows us through a lot of these sources. Let's take a look at the next source. I'm building towards something, and we should have the time to see it. Let's take a look at the next source, which also speaks to not so much the forcing of one another, but who is expected to. When is it that external people are expected to help solve a problem that is not yet affecting them? There are a lot of problems in the world today. Let's think about the two that are like most obvious to me, and people on the Zoom who know me will kind of chuckle when I say them because they're the things that I've been obsessed with for the last, one of them for 5 years and one of them for 2 years, right? But think about vaccinations. Think about the climate change and the climate culture. Our Mishnah is extremely insular. It talks about things that people of a city can require of the other members of a city. Is there any indication anywhere that we could actually expand that and say, well, we have a global village and all the citizens of the world owe it to all the other citizens of the world to take care of the planet? That's possibility one. Or the other question of there is this question, right? If you remember COVID came to us from overseas, right? Came to the United States from overseas. I don't know if you remember that January where it was later where the first COVID hits landed in the United States and we were like, oh, there it is. So in the case of vaccination, we are an entire country, and the vaccination status of everyone in the country matters for everyone else. Herd immunity in New York City, where I am located, that would be like an amazing thing, but people are coming into and going out of New York City all the time. We have totally porous borders within our country, and that being the case, is there room in the halakha to expand this sense that everybody has to take care of the good of the community outside of sort of an insular, narrow space, a neighborhood, a city, those kinds of things? So this source that we're going to look at now from the Gemara in Baba Batra is one of the first texts that really leads us in that direction. It says as follows: Amar Rav Yehuda, Lekarya dinahara tatae misaye ilae. Ilae lamisaye tatae. So Rav Yehuda, for those of you who are keeping track, is the Talmid of Rav, who is the Talmid of Rebbe, the writer of the Mishnah. Oh, I said writer. People should slap me. The compiler of the Mishnah. Rav Yehuda says, for a project of dredging the river, to make sure that it flows smoothly downstream, the lower communities, downriver communities, have to help the upriver communities with the dredging project. Now, it's interesting. I realize I'm going to pause for a moment. Half of what I've said has been parenthetical, but I'm going to say another parenthetical, which is to say, we said that you have to help to build a wall. We said you have to make a gatehouse. People, when they come to this, often assume one of two things. I think they often assume that it is financial, that you have to pay for the labor to be done. I just want to remind people that in the pre-modern time, that When you were required to like participate in a project, it might have been a barn raising. Like you might have been required to actually build the thing in question. And if we talk about downriver settlements, the downriver settlements may have been required to send workers up to the upriver settlements. Years ago, I was editing a book. I wasn't editing. I was actually fact checking a book for it's since come out. And I don't think that my fact checking actually did anything for the book. But the author made the comment that when the Egyptians set taskmasters on the Jews, that the Hebrew is not taskmasters. It says sarei misim, and she said it's not taskmasters. It's taxmasters. Taxes. Misim in Hebrew are taxes. So immediately that triggered my like, that can't be true, right? Like they didn't pay taxes back in those days. So the word task, so I checked both the etymologies of the word mas and the etymologies of the word task. And so both mas and task and tax have an early etymology meaning to contribute people to participate in labor. And what would happen then is once you became wealthy enough that you didn't want to participate in the labor anymore, you could pay your way out of it and either hire someone directly or give money to the government to make those hires itself. And that actually is the relationship between the word task and the word tax, for the linguists among you. In any case, so the downriver cities have to participate with the upper river cities. And the opposite, but the upper river cities, let's say that there's, I don't know if we're talking about cities or settlements, but let's say that there are settlements above the places where the silt buildup is actually happening. So the river flows through freely, let's say for 3 miles, then there's a silt buildup, and then there's 3 more miles where before the river actually reaches its endpoint in the sea. So the people who live above the blockage don't have to send labor. They don't receive any benefit from a dredging project. If the dredging was happening in their location or above, then they would have a problem because they wouldn't have enough water. But if the dredging project is happening downriver from them, they don't have to participate. And this is an interesting point that is also mentioned in the case of the walls and has to be discussed. That is possible that people who do not benefit don't pay or don't contribute. By and large, that is not the direction that the halakha goes in the case of the insular halakha, the city walls, the things for the courtyards. But in the case of like contributing for cities, those between settlements, then the people who benefit have to contribute. The people who don't benefit don't contribute. V'chilufa b'maya demitra. The opposite is true when we're talking about rainwater. That is to say, if there's a block, what you want from rainwater is for the rainwater to flow downhill and either to the river or whatever, to be drained from the higher properties. So if there's a blockage upstream, then the people downstream are not suffering. They don't need that water, let's say in the rainy season. It's the people upstream who have the problem. So anybody upstream of a blockage needs to pay for it, but anybody downstream doesn't have to pay for the removal of a blockage in terms of draining rainwater. Tanya Namihachi. This is also a braita. This appears in the Tosefta. Chamesh ginot hamisapkot mayim mimayan echad. So now we're back into like the micro. 5 gardens that each one they all get the water from like a spring that is on a high point, and the water flows down. Vinit kalkela mayan, so the spring gets blocked. Kulam etaknot im aliyona. Everybody has to participate in unblocking the spring. Nimtzet hatachtona mitakenet im kulam umitakenet leatzma. The bottommost garden will always be required to fix a blockage, right? But if there's a blockage let's say we said 5 gardens. So if the blockage of the water happens at the 3rd garden, so the people in the higher gardens don't have to pay for that. It doesn't bother them. Their gardens are watered. It's the people below who always have to pay, and the lowest garden will always have to pay for everything above. וכן 5 חצרות שהיו מקלחות מים לביב. So this is also true of 5 courtyards who have a single drainage ditch. This really brings us back to the drainage ditch that removes the water from the rainwater, and maybe also like sewage and things like that. Lebiv echad v'nit kalkel abiv, and the sewer, the pipe or the channel gets blocked. Kulan mitaknot ima tachtona. Wherever the blockage is, everybody above the blockage has to help remove that blockage. Anyone below the blockage is not suffering from the blockage. Like if the water doesn't reach them, they don't care. It's wastewater. It's not the water that they need. Nimtzet ha'elyona. So now the top one, the highest one, in cases of a blockage, will be fixing the blockage with all of the lower cases, with all of the lower gardens. This is not one of the sources that I want to spend a huge amount of time on, but what I do want to note is two things, but they're going to come up in the next source. The first is that there is a sense of responsibility to other people in terms of damage that is going to be reached. It is responsibility in cases where damage to others could actually come and eventually reach you. So that's the side of Tanakama. That's the side of the person who says everybody has to fix the spring. If the spring gets blocked, nobody gets any water. That's Tanakama's side. But there is also a sense here that says people who do not benefit from the repair don't have to participate in it. That's the Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel side. The side that says, show me need and I will participate. If I have no need, I'm not going to participate. Okay? So with this, we come to the primary source that I want to talk about today, and it's been sort of the source that's been guiding me for the last year. This is the 4th tshuva of Maharik, Rabbi Yosef Cologne. He is a German rabbi, 15th century, what did I say? 1420 to 1480. Starts out in Germany and sort of gets his education there, and then drifts down to Italy because of the Holy Roman Empire connection. Italy and Germany actually have this, for some reason, the funny geographical connection. In any case, he drifts down to Italy, and he lives, at least in this time, the time we're talking about is Pavia. I'm going to not take more than 4 minutes to tell this story. There is a fascinating story behind this tshuva. It is the story of the blood libel of Regensburg of 1476. And if you're interested, you can go to your local libraries. I will say that my local library doesn't have it. It's the New York Public Library, so maybe you have to go to your local university library. But there is an amazing book by a fellow named Shia called The Myth of Ritual Murder, Blood Libels in Reformation Germany. Anyway, it's called The Myth of Ritual Murder, HSIA. Evie, do you mind just writing HSIA in the chat? Okay, so
just to make sure I got it, HSIA, right?
HSIA is how he spells his name. Yeah, he's a professor at Penn. Interesting, not a Jewish guy, but he spends a lot of time on Jewish anti-Semitism. In 1476, the Bishop of Regensburg takes a trip to Rome, and on his way back, he travels through Trent, which is a town in Germany, and he learns that there's been a blood libel there. He's interested, and he looks at the confession of the victims, really, of the blood libel in Trent. In their confession, they name names in Regensburg, where he is from, saying these people, the following people, one of them is the Rav of the town, his name is Yosel, I think, participated us in murdering a Christian child and using their blood for matzah. he goes back to Regensburg and he tells the Regensburg authorities that they need to they should do something about this. There's been a ritual murder. The Regensburg authorities arrest 17 people, including Rabbi Yossel, and torture them. And under torture, many, although not all, confess to the blood libel. Sorry, to the well, whatever. Yes, to the blood libel, and of course, the details that they give are all totally different because nobody knows what the details are supposed to be. And they didn't get enough hints. Like, was it in the spring? Like they could have gotten anyway. When interrogations under torture seem to result in this. In any case, the Jews have nothing to do to like get these people out of jail in Regensburg, but they do have a connection to Emperor Frederick III, who was a friend to the Jews, and they bribe him, or they attempt to bribe him, to step in. He steps in and demands that the Regensburg authorities release these Jews and that they just not move for any further with this. Regensburg is not a feudal city. It is not under anybody's like official control. It is a free city in Germany. It's in Bavaria. It's not under the auspices of the Prince of Bavaria at that time. His name was, I don't remember, Wilhelm maybe. In any case, but so they actually can stand up to the emperor to a certain degree, but the emperor is serious and he starts putting significant pressure. The people of Regensburg finally, after 2 years, finally concede to the emperor and agree to release the Jews, assuming that the Jews pay 23,000 silver florins. That is too much money for the Jews. By the way, I think 8,000 of that was, or 10,000 of that was to bribe the emperor. 8,000 of it was to pay fines that the emperor had laid on Regensburg for not following his decrees, and the rest was to pay for room and board of the prisoners. In any case, the Jews don't have that money, and so their friends remain imprisoned. What they do is they start writing to communities outside of Regensburg, Nuremberg, and others, and they say, please help us raise this money. We need this money. And the communities are reluctant, to say the least. It's a lot of money. They don't want to get involved. And the rabbis of the communities are ready to take voluntary contributions to send to Regensburg, like like at the shul, they will have drives to like support a community or something like that. But it's not something that the rabbis are willing to levy a tax about. And finally, the rabbis decide to come together in Nuremberg and see if it is viable for them to actually levy a tax, to demand that everybody pay for the relief of Nuremberg. And they're not sure. They're not sure if they can do it. And so they send to the Maharik, who is the authoritative halachic figure of that time, to find out if they can demand this to happen. So this is the answer that the Maharik writes to the rabbis of Nuremberg to tell them like if they are entitled to set a tax. He says as follows: Omar, I will say, כי לפי הנראה לעניות דעתי, שכל אותם הקהילות אשר ראוי לחשוב וקרוב לוודאי הוא חס ושלום, שגם עליהם היה עובר כוס התרעילה, אם לא היה הדבר הזה מתוקן, כפי האפשר, שהדין נותן שיישאו בעול גם הם מאחר שהצלת קריית קדושה רגנסבורג היא הצלתם ונהפך בהפך חס ושלום. He says, it is, according to my opinion, the answer is that anybody who is in danger of having a blood libel leveled against them when other communities see how successful Regensburg was in seizing the Jewish, right? The blood libel is just the start, right? You have the blood libel, the government can seize the properties belonging to those Jews, and then there's the pogrom that follows, right? Where the the non-Jews get even more wealth from the Jews. He says when people see how successful Regensburg is, those blood libels are going to pop up in other places. And any city that is at risk for that really, really ought to take their part in paying for this. The rescue of Regensburg is their rescue, and the downfall of Regensburg will be their downfall. And I want to pause here again, with your permission, to just relate that when I first read this, I had a sense of like, you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. Because if they see how much money they get from this, to bribe whoever, then like that also motivates them. But when I read this account, what I realized was that that blood libels are actually like COVID. That is to say, the blood libel in Trent, when they interrogated people in a blood libel, they would ask, who are your co-conspirators and where are they now? And so you would actually have the blood libel in Trent gave birth to the blood libel in Regensburg. The blood libel in Regensburg, there was like an attempt to connect it to a blood libel in Passau, which was, I don't know, a nearby city. And even then, even after that, they also tried to like use information they got from the blood libel of Regensburg to establish a case of host desecration. I don't know if you're familiar that there was like a claim that the Jews would try to torture the wafer, the host. And that was like that was worse because that was like torturing their god. In any case, in Nuremberg. So these cities really, it's not the kind of thing where they're like perched on a teeter-totter. If the blood libel goes through, that will be harmful to everybody. And so he says, even though right now there are no libels going on in other places, Regensburg, it's just in Regensburg. Maybe you want to like just sort of like shut them off. In New York, we do that to people who have bed bugs. Like, finish with your bed bugs and then you can come for Shabbos. So if you want to just like close the doors, right? Livadam mikol makom sof hapuranut haya magia gam lahem. So since eventually it is going to come to you, this does not stay in one place. This migrates from place to place. Nidonim hem al shem sofam. Therefore, we judge them based on the ultimate solution, the ultimate condition, rather than where they are right now. You're safe now, but this threat actually represents potential damage, and you need to pay for the prevention of potential damage. וחייבים לסייע בהוצאת הצלת קריה קדושה רגנברג ישמרי רחמנה ויינטרה. And they must with the word chayav. Some of my students are on, and they know that anytime it doesn't say chayav, I always note that like it says sarich, it says tov, but the word you're looking for is chayav, and he says the word chayav. You have to help with rescuing Regensburg. So what's the proof? V'ra'aya lefi hanir'eh, and the proof of this, Mihad garis bebaba metzia perak hamekabel amar Rav Yehuda hai karya denahara tatai misayla ilai lo misayla tatai. The proof for this is our case of the dredging the river. That when you go to dredge the river has not become blocked yet. The silt buildup has only started. If you try to do it once the blockage has already taken place, that's a lot of work. Do it ahead of time. So the damage has not yet started, but because the damage is guaranteed, and the same with a sewer blockage, right? In a sewer blockage, the people well above the sewer are not yet having trouble flushing their toilets. It only starts as the water starts backing up and up and up and up. It takes some time for that to happen. So the damage has not reached them yet, says the Maharik, and yet it will reach them, and therefore they have to pay. But wait, says the Maharik, there's a problem. In the case of water backing up or water not flowing, that is guaranteed damage. Bari hezeka. Clear damage, clear danger that this is going to happen. But in this case, you don't know for sure that that this is going to happen. And this is what the Maharik writes. Aval hacha lo b'riazeka. It's not clear in the case of Regensburg that like which town is going to get a blood libel because of Regensburg. It's not going to happen to all of them guaranteed. Kuleha, יש להסתפק ולומר, ואולי לא תתפשט עלילות השקר והכזב הזה בשאר מקומות. Maybe it won't spread. שהרי אנו רואים בעולם So the first thing he says is that I'm gonna move away from reading and tell you what this says. Is that the first thing he says is that actually the non-Jews, like, they're all the time after us. This is an opportunity for them. All they're waiting for is a spark. And in Regensburg, there can be a spark. So it's as bad as backing water. Now, is that true? Is it not true? He feels like it's true in that time. And frankly, like having seen the discussions sort of from Trent to Regensburg to Passau, it does feel, I feel threatened myself just reading something that happened in 1470s. The second thing he says is, even if you don't see a clear danger, afilu tomar, she'ein ze ele chashash sakana be'alma, ve'lo taseu kevadai, it's not certain, o kekarov levadai, ve'afal pi shekein, shu karov levadai, mikol makom, mi lo tnan kofinoto livnot beit shar v'delet lekofinoto livnot le'ir choma. He goes back to our Mishnah about the city and he says, what do you mean? Everybody has to pay for the city. So, right, even if it's not going to benefit you, even if it's not to your benefit, like even if it's not something that you're interested in, there are certain things you have to pay for, even if there's not immediate damage. So he has shown from the river example that you can demand things in more extensive geography than just a city. And he's shown from the city example that you can demand things from people that they might not benefit from. The problem is that the two don't meet. You haven't showed that in the expansive case you can demand things that they don't benefit from, and in the city case that you can demand people like outside the city, etc. And so he ultimately says the following things, and I'm going to finish with this. Sheyesh lachush lekol hashayachot bechashash hahi shesayu bedavar ve'afilu miglimad al kitfei ve'afilu haya lehem limkol she'ar rosham. So he says, anybody who feels concerned that this may reach them is required to pay. Now, he doesn't say what we need him to say, which is all of Germany right now is a powder keg for Jews. We are all one city, and all of Germany has to pay to save Regensburg. However, and I don't have this source on the sheet, I'm not sure why I decided to leave it, except for maybe I didn't have space. However, he doesn't say it, but a colleague, the Mahari Bruna, who himself was actually accused in Regensburg in 1474 of being involved in a blood libel and was rescued again by Frederick, says the words exactly, Kol Eretz Ashkenaz Kimidina Achat Dame. All of Germany is one city. What is striking about, and I think that that's the only explanation for the Maharik, that is what he believes, that the whole country actually is one city. Where does this leave us? So the halakha, actually the Maharik appears in the Shulchan Aruch. The Rama brings the language of the Maharik. What this leaves us with is a sense that there are things in the world that everybody needs to take care of, even if the harm has not yet reached us. And you wonder if those rich people had thought of hiring mercenaries instead of stockpiling 21, I don't know, would mercenaries have helped against the Roman army? There are things in the world that is going to affect everybody and that everybody needs to pay attention to. The story of Tisha B'Av is a story of people with tunnel vision. It's a story of rich people with tunnel vision who do the right thing. It's a story of true believers with tunnel vision who do the wrong thing. But the story remains that if we can see more broadly, understand that the harm that happens to others is going to come home to us, that is The halakha is that it is our responsibility to pay for those things. And I'll say it's whether or not we see it. But the halakha is the things that will come home to us, we need to participate in. Thank you so much. This is much more of a lecture than it was a discussion. But I thank you all, and I wish you all an easy fast, a meaningful fast, and geula krova b'mihera v'yameinu.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Resnikoff, and meaningful fast to you as well. And thank you also to everyone who joined us today and is part of our learning community here at Drisha. And thank you so much again, Rabbi Resnikoff. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing everyone next time. Lehitraot.
All right, a pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.